When we think of childhood, we imagine safety, games, innocence, protection. But Viking children had none of that. By the age of 7, their games were already preparing them for hardship and conflict. And for many, childhood didn't truly end. They never reached adulthood. Modern people often imagine Viking families as brutal, cold, and distant. But that image is incomplete, because the real danger of Viking childhood wasn't constant violence. It was constant uncertainty. No one knew if they would survive the winter, if food would last, if their family would still be alive the following year. Fear wasn't taught. It was learned naturally. Viking childhood wasn't about happiness. It was about endurance. Every stage of growing up was a test, physical, mental, unforgiving. Fail it, and adulthood was never guaranteed. In this video, you'll see how Viking children were raised, trained, and shaped for a world that showed little mercy. In the Viking Age, being born was not enough. Survival was uncertain from the very beginning. Infant mortality was high, especially during harsh winters and periods of famine. And the fate of a newborn often depended on one person, the father. Only after he accepted the child did it fully become part of the family. Weakness was dangerous, because in a world with limited resources and constant threats, every life had to justify itself. Even surviving infancy did not mean safety. Children were exposed to cold from their earliest days. They slept in longhouses filled with smoke, animals, and noise. Illness spread quickly, and care was limited to herbs, rituals, and hope. Many children grew up surrounded by loss, siblings who never grew up, relatives taken by disease or conflict. Hardship was not hidden. It was familiar. But surviving infancy was only the beginning. Viking children did not play to relax. They played to prepare. Wooden swords, wrestling, throwing spears, running across rough ground. These were not simple toys. They were tools for learning resilience. Injuries were common. Pain was expected, because strength, speed, and endurance were not optional traits. They were necessary for survival. Some games were risky by design, running on ice, climbing roofs and rocks, competing without protection. Adults rarely intervened, because fear of discomfort was seen as weakness. A child who avoided risk would struggle later in life. Danger was not discouraged, it was accepted. Play was preparation. Preparation was survival. But physical strength alone was not enough. Viking children were also trained to control fear. They witnessed animal slaughter. They heard stories of raids, feuds, and long-standing rivalries. Harsh realities were not dramatized. They were normalized. By observing adults, children learned when to stand firm, when to retreat, and when to remain silent. Fear was not removed. It was managed. There were no schools in the Viking world, no classrooms, no textbooks. Children learned by watching, listening, and remembering. Stories, sagas, taught them loyalty, honor, reputation, and fate. Most Viking children never learned to read or write. Runes were known, but literacy was rare. Knowledge passed from mouth to ear, and mistakes were rarely forgiven. Children also learned through correction. Errors were addressed immediately, sometimes strictly. There was little patience for repeated failure. Learning was not about curiosity. It was about remembering what kept you safe. Forgetting an important lesson could lead to serious consequences. By the age of 7 or 8, children were expected to contribute. Boys helped with farming, fishing, and shipbuilding. Girls learned cooking, weaving, and managing households. Everyone had a role. and value came from usefulness. A child who could not contribute became a burden, and burdens were dangerous in Viking society. Childhood did not shield you, it measured you. Reputation mattered, even in youth. Children were observed, judged, and remembered. Cowardice did not go unnoticed. Bravery spread quickly through word of mouth. A single moment could shape how others treated you for years. Honor did not begin in adulthood. It was built or lost early. Childhood also prepared Viking children for loss. Parents were gone. Brothers never returned. Homes were destroyed. Raids, famine, and illness constantly reshaped families. Grief was not analyzed. It was endured. Emotion changed nothing. Adaptation did. By the age of 12 to 15, Viking children were no longer considered young. They could marry. They could work full responsibilities. Their lives carried real risk. There was no clear moment when childhood ended. It faded as responsibility took over. The world did not wait for readiness. Not all Viking children lived long enough to prove themselves. Some were lost to labor, some to hardship, some to illness or conflict. Those who endured carried these experiences into adulthood. This is why Viking society valued strength, honor, and reputation so deeply. Because vulnerability was never theoretical. They had seen its cost from an early age. Childhood also shaped how Vikings understood responsibility. Freedom came late, and only after proof. Until then, obedience mattered more than choice. Children were expected to listen, observe, and endure. Questioning authority was rare. Survival depended on trust in family, elders, and tradition. From an early age, children learned that individual desires came second. What mattered was the group, the household, the community. This mindset followed them into adulthood, onto farms, ships, and battlefields. Viking society was built not on comfort, but on discipline learned early in life. Childhood also taught Viking children patience, not hope, patience. Life rarely improved quickly. Harvests failed, winters returned, loss repeated itself. Children learned early that effort did not guarantee reward. What mattered was endurance over time, waiting, repeating the same work day after day. This shaped a mindset that accepted hardship without complaint, not because it was easy, but because there was no alternative. Viking childhood was not harsh by accident. It was shaped by necessity, because in a land of cold, hunger, and constant struggle, only resilient children reached adulthood, and innocence was a luxury that world could not afford.